Hi, we're going to try another tutorial today. One of the most frequently asked questions that I get is how do you set up a weaving jig, especially my weaving jigs. Now I'm going to show you how to set up my weaving jigs, but some of the information might be applicable to other forms of weaving jigs like the Wonder Weaver or some of the loom type jigs. I make two sizes nowadays, and they're both made on angled type pieces of PVC. I make an 80 thread and a 100 thread. I always tell people if you have any doubts, just go with the 100 thread. And this is kind of a close-up of what they look like. This foam is made out of sole material used in orthopedic shoes, and this is actually PVC that's like rain spout PVC. I just split it into 4 sections and then make my jigs on there. I've found that making them on this angle really works well to keep the thread close to the rod, maybe too close in some situations, so you might have to think about spreading the thread rather than packing it tighter. Anyway, let's get started. I'll show you how it's set up. Alright, first let's take a good look at the rod that I'm going to use. I've marked, you can see these 3 marks here. This is where the stripper guide is going to go. And then starting here is where I want the weave to start. I etch the rod. Some people don't like that, but I don't go deep enough to cause any damage to the rod, plus the fact down in this area most rods are pretty strong. So that's where I'm going to want my weave to start, and that helps me figure out where I want to put my tape. And then there's the foregrip of the rod. Now let me get set up. Take one quick look down here. There's my jigs ready to put on and the tapes that I'm going to be using to apply it. Okay, now let me see how I can get set up to do this right. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is center the right hand jig, which is the jig that holds all the threads that are not being used in the active pattern. In this case, it's really simple. My pattern that I'm going to use is 80 threads by 110 threads. So I'm using an 80 thread jig. Basically, I want to center it on the rod because I want my pattern to be centered on the viewing surface of the rod. So it's really easy, especially with these jigs, because they're angled, and hopefully I've got it pretty close to the center. So first thing I'm going to do is just kind of tack it on. This isn't really putting it on hard and heavy, but I want to just tack it into place so that I can put it on really good and firm later. I just put a little piece of tape on those 2 little tongues on the end of the weaving jig. My first weaving jigs were flat, and they were, they work quite well too. The key was the foam. The foam is a high density foam, and it really holds the thread well. Anyway, this angled stuff really keeps the thread following the rod, and it's close to the rod, so I don't have some of the problems that are inherent when the jig's too far or too high off of the rod itself. Now what I like to do is I like to put some tape here to form like a blockade, because when you're wrapping, this thread is under tension, and it's nylon thread, so there's a little bit of stretch to it. You can actually keep pulling this jig towards the left with the tension that you put in the thread when you stretch it and put it into the grooves. Okay, so I got that anchored in the front, so now it can't go forward, and then I just put some more tape over it. Tape's cheap, so I use a lot of it. Then I'll come over here, kind of hard to do reaching around the camera like this. Then I come over here, just to put it in good and tight. Okay, so I have my right hand jig up, and you'll notice how it's numbered 5 through 40, then 45 through 80 in kind of like a V. Most of the simple jigs that have been made in the past and are being made now are on the same basic principle. Okay, let's move this rod down a little bit and get ready to start on the next part. Okay, let's go back over to where all those marks were on the rod. And these three are where the guide's going to go. And then that's going to be where I want to start my weave. So what I'm going to do now is lay tape, masking tape in that area, but I leave myself enough room to start my wrap. Okay, I put it on good and tight, and then I reverse it, and the sticky side is out. Hold on, I got to get a pair of scissors. Alright, I got a knife instead of a pair of scissors. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut this and tape it down nice and smooth. Alright, that's my tape to start putting my thread on and filling the right hand jig. Let me get my thread organized and we'll get started on that. Okay, I'm going to show you how I set things up a little bit here. The pattern is made on Pick to Weave, my favorite program, and thanks to Owen I saved myself hours and hours of writing left lists. Anyway, you'll see that I have a piece of paper here with colors and numbers. It probably looks like gibberish. What that is the order that I want to lay my thread into the jigs and on the rod. I always like to work with the last color I come to in the weave is the first color I lay on the rod. In this case, you see it's a light yellow, the lateral line of the yellowtail. So I use this light yellow. This is the number of threads I need to lay, and then that's the color I'm going to use. Although I changed my mind already, I do that a lot. And then you see the light green comes in, and so on and so forth. Then I like to organize all my thread. It's a 6-layer weave, so I get all 6 layers of all 6 different colors of the thread out, so that I'm not running and stopping and going and doing all kinds of weird things, getting out of sync. So, all right, that's it for the setup of how I get ready. Now I'm going to go to the other end of the rod. And here I am at the other end of the rod. I hope this is going to work. It's going to be hard to work around the camera or through the camera, but I hope it'll help you guys. I'm going to put a couple of bands down at the far end of the rod down here that I'm going to use to keep the rod from rolling backwards, because with the weight of the jig it wants to roll on the rack here. So I'm going to put that on first and then get ready to rock and roll. Okay, there's the bands that I was telling you about. They're just basically bungee cords with a couple of cloth bands that I wrap over the rod, put some tension on it, and that's just to keep it from backing up. Okay, down here we go. And I'll get started. Oh, show you this. Some people pre-cut the pieces that they're going to put in their jigs. I know Jim Upton has a little thing where he wraps it around something and then cuts it, and it's the right length to reach from the tape to the jig. Me, I do it the old school way. I just cut each piece separately. Okay, get spaced back out here and get started. Okay, I go over here and I get my thread and I want to center it. Put my eyeballs on here. I want to center it right down the center of the rod. Okay, I look at the tip top, look at the jig. That looks pretty much the center. Then I bring it up here, and since it's an 80 thread jig, it's real simple. Just put it on the 40 thread and cut it. I like to cut extra because I don't like to run out of thread when I get to the other end. Then from here on, it's fairly simple. Just put it in the groove. Cut. Groove. I try not to use my fingers too much because your fingers have oils and it makes the tape lose its stickiness. This must be a new jig because the thread's being difficult to put in it. I always like to start from the center, obviously. It's the best way to keep your pattern centered. So now, I don't want to bore you to death, but that's basically how this is done. I'll finish this layer. This is the first layer I'm going to lay, and then after this I'll show you how to get ready for the second layer. Okay, got the first layer down, which was 26 through 50. Usually I like to add a thread on either side of those numbers, so I did 25 through 51. And you'll notice here that there's a split between the threads. That's where the jig is split up here between 40 and 41, so it helps keep everything centered. You see, I've got it all taped down here. Now what I like to do is I like to take a real thin piece of tape and tape the thread actually right directly to the blank. Not to the tape that it's on, but on the blank. So I've got this 1/8 inch green tape here. And I like to just put it right over there. So hopefully if I've centered this right, it's not going to move now. Now what I'll do is I'll take the wide tape again. This time I don't have to start facing down. I can start with the sticky side up, lay it on top, wrap it around once, hit it with the knife, and I'm ready to put my next layer of thread in, which I've already set up here, and it's the lighter green, which is going to make the jawline on the fish. So what I do is I find this split that I was talking about, and I match it up with this thread, and I know that that's going to be number 40 or 41, depending on how you want to look at it. And again, just keep stacking the threads. That's what I like about this foam. You can just stack. I've stacked up to 10 layers. Might even have been 11 in a couple of instances. But most good weaves that I do are right at 5 to 8 layers. So now I'll go through this whole thing, and we won't bore you to death with it, but I'll get to the next layer when we get there. Okay, while I was putting the light green thread on, I realized that I can actually turn this into a 5 layer instead of a 6 layer weave by adding on red on the same layer as the light green, because the light green goes from 37 to 53 and the red goes from 23 to 31. So what I'm going to do is go from 22 actually down to probably 34, and then I'll have green the rest of the way. As you noticed here, I've got a little peg in my track that I just slipped the spool over, and that's how I control my thread, so it's not rolling around all over the table. Now I'll go back up to the other end, start laying the red. Okay. I had laid green as far as 33. Now I'm going to go 32 all the way down to 22. So again, I don't want to take up all the time on this videotape just showing me put thread on. So I'll stop it here and pick it up on the next layer. Okay, I've got that layer done. Now, just like I did on the previous layer, I take a little piece of 1/8 inch tape, lay it on the threads, push them down to keep them close to the rod. If I see anything starting to bunch up too much, this is where I'll take a pick and kind of spread or move thread around. Well, it's easy to do. Looks like it's going to be okay. You're trying to stay as close to stacking them on top of each other as you can. It's impossible to do it 100%, but the closer you do it, the easier it will be in the final outcome and for your tightening at the end. Again, pull out another piece of tape, put it on, one wrap. Get ready to lay on my next layer. Now at this point I don't see any real reason to keep hammering home how I put it on. Basically it's always the same thing. Center the first thread, work out both ways, put a little piece of tape on, put a new piece of tape on until I get all 5 layers on. Okay, I'll get back to you when I get all 5 layers on. Okay, I've got all 5 layers on there now, and it's time for me to rig it up for the second jig, the left-hand jig. And again, I put a layer of tape on with the sticky side up. I take the other jig, place it on there just like I did the right-hand jig. Do a quickie little tape job here just to hold it in place. Go back up to the front. I want to hold it down pretty good in the front, so several wraps with the smaller thread, with the smaller tape. Then I'll tie it down with the bigger tape. What you want to try not to do though is not to twist this tape, because you can push it off center. Okay, back to the back. Now I'm ready to start the weave. In this case, what I'm going to do is, I made the pattern with A for the pattern thread and D for the wrap thread, because what I want to do is something that I've been experimenting with a lot lately, which is instead of using size D or E thread, I'm using 2 turns with A thread. Get this thing started. Okay, I did my little trick to start my wrap. I actually wrap 2 threads around and then I back it out once. And then to being held real good. What I look for here is to make sure all these threads are staying flat. Now I do see that there's going to be like a 4-thread difference between the yellow and the white, but usually I can make that up by tugging and pulling. So that's basically how to set up a weave on the simple jigs. It's the same thing with the flats. Even with Jimmy's Wonder Weaver, it's very similar. You put a piece of tape down to hold one end while you're filling the jig, and then put the other jig up when you're ready to do the wrapping. I'm going to keep the video ready just in case a couple of things happen during the weave that I feel might be good information and good help. Okay, so that's it for right now. We'll see if I run into any other secrets while I'm wrapping. Okay, here's time for a little tip on weaving. Right now, I'm getting ready to do a color change. That means I was working with one color thread, now I'm switching to another color thread. Right here is where I'm working. It's on the eyeball, and you'll see I'm going from a green to a white of the eyeball. I always tell people to find their own way of keeping track of how to do this. So what I'm going to do is show you my method, and then maybe you'll come up with something else better or different, and but at least you'll have a system. If you have a system and do it the same all the time, you always have consistent gaps. If you have consistent gaps, it's much easier to close the weave by rolling and packing at the end. Okay, so my design says 17 through 20 in green. I pulled 21 right here, over there, and then 22 through 24. Now I'm going to switch number 25. I picked out thread number 25 on the left hand side, and I'm going to switch it for thread 25 on the right hand side, from a green to a white. So I pull the green out and I lay it over the top. I just put it over the top of the rod. I take 25 out, pull it over, kind of snug it up a little bit, put it in the space. Then I pick up thread 25 that I had pulled, the green one, and I move it over to the right hand side. Also, I got to do that with 26, so I pull 26 up in green, bind 26 in white, pull 26, drop it over the top, take 26 in white across, put it in, go back, pick up 26 in green, and put it in the right hand jig. If you do that consistently over and over and over, even if it's stripes, at least you keep the gaps. When the two threads swap, you keep the gaps the same. If the gaps are the same, then at least they look uniform, even if you can't pack them and tighten them up all the way. That's just one little hint. There's other ways of doing it. If you find something better, share it. Okay, thought I'd show you what it ended up at, at the end, after I showed you how to set it up. This is my last weave. I'm going to call him Grumpy Yellowtail or something like that. Just a fun little weave, but I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it is extremely tight. I haven't done any tightening. In fact, if I got a problem at all, it might be a couple areas where I'm a little too tight. So I will post pictures of it, of course, online when I get it all finished up. This is probably going to be one of my giveaway rods for my final big sponsored charter at the end of the year on the Big Game 90. Anyway, Hope this helped a little bit. I didn't get to give many tips on weaving during the work because it really went well. So maybe on the next one I'll throw in a few more tips. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.